Good Sunday morning, Northeast Ohio, and a very happy Veterans Day to all those who serve to protect the very word that is the foundation of this segment, democracy. Of course, there's no greater exercise of democracy than getting out to vote, something we know that doesn't always happen in a midterm election, but this week it most certainly did. While not much changed so far as control in Ohio, the 2018 election was one for the record books. The nearly 4.4 million votes cast was the most ever in an Ohio midterm election, and the highest percentage of voters in one since the Republican wave of 1994. Cuyahoga County offers the clearest glimpse, though, of why the numbers in the state broke the way they did. Turnout was 53% as a whole, but when broken down by party, Democrats and Republicans both turned out at 84% each. It was the largest voting bloc. Independents that comparatively stayed home.
I think that number was low because independents are not necessarily motivated by the same kind of partisan issues that Republicans and Democrats are motivated by. So from a conventional perspective, the economy is doing very well, relatively speaking, in Ohio. Independents that are voting are looking at that issue.
And the more satisfied they were, the more likely they were to stay home. For Republicans, there was a shuffling of the chairs in Columbus and an essential sweep. Robert Sprague replacing Josh Mandel as treasurer, former Senate President Keith Faber replacing Dave Yost as auditor, Yost for his part moving over into the job of Ohio Attorney General, Frank LaRose replacing John Husted as Secretary of State, and Husted moving into the lieutenant governor's spot, serving under now Governor-elect Mike DeWine.
Ohio's best days, I believe, are ahead of us. So join us. Join us as we start this journey. Join us as we move Ohio forward and as we work to do this all together.
The bright spot for Democrats was Sherrod Brown, becoming the first Ohioan since John Glenn to win a third term in the U.S. Senate, defeating Republican Jim Renacci.
This is our America. We will never yield the hallowed ground of patriotism to extremists.
Brown's ability to win in what is now a red state is something that automatically enters his name into the 2020 conversation.
There's a lot of talk that at a minimum he might be a vice presidential candidate, depending on what happens with the presidential race. There's others that are talking about maybe try to encourage him to jump into the presidential race.
Before Tuesday's election, I asked Brown about that.
I don't have this great desire, unlike a number of my colleagues, to be president of the United States. I don't know what happens in the next 2 years, but I love where I am.
Something uttered by many presidential hopefuls before they announce. Another Ohioan in that 2020 vote is Governor John Kosich, who told me with the midterms out of the way, he is weighing his options, and one of those options is clearly a possibility of a third-party run.
We always talk about the need for a third party. We always talk about people disaffected from the D's and the R's. But if partisanship is high and people are splitting in those two directions, there's a lot in the middle, but is the middle really interested in a third party run by someone who's really not part of any party?
That Republicans did better in Ohio this week than in other parts of the country was not a surprise to the folks at the Republican National Committee. Having invested hundreds of millions of dollars into their data analytics effort, they've been able to put a profile together of every voter in the country. 3,000 consumer variables on you, based on legally obtained information that's out there, what you listen to, subscribe to, buy and search.
It really gives us some insight, not just where to target voters, but how to target voters. There's nothing comparable over at the Democrat National Committee.
Bob Paduchik is national co-chair of the Republican National Committee. He's also a Northeast Ohio native. Analytics help, but he said ground game, personal interaction, remains a key.
Volunteer to voter contact is the most effective way to reach a voter and to convince them.
Looking ahead to 2020, President Trump won Ohio. He also won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by famously a combined 80,000 votes. All three of those states went Democrat in senator and governor this week. What's your game plan there?
We won those states because the president had a conservative working class message. I mean, I grew up in Akron, Ohio. My dad worked for Cyberling Tire and Rubber. I'm not your traditional Republican. What made me a Republican was my family's from Eastern Europe, and the Republicans, Ronald Reagan, president at the time, was leading the fight on communism. But what the Republican Party has become under President Trump is a working class conservative party. I still think he has a great message to reach out to those voters, and I think we'll be able to go back and make that argument in 2020.
And to be clear, from this day forth, everything on both sides of the ball is about 2020. With Democracy 2018, I'm John Kosich. Enjoy your Sunday.